The sound of the metal door slamming shut echoed through the concrete hallway of ADX Florence, America's most secure prison. The guards' boots clicked in rhythm as the corridor lights flickered, one by one. Inside cell block H, silence wasn't just normal, it was the rule. No voices, no footsteps, not even the sound of breathing. The inmates here weren't allowed to speak, to look at each other, or even to hear the world beyond the thick, soundproof walls. Yet tonight something was different. A faint knock echoed through the silence. It was coming from deep inside one of the isolation cells, the one that held the most feared inmate of them all. Officer Daniels froze. He knew what that cell was. Cell 118, a reinforced concrete box that housed an inmate no one dared talk about. They said he hadn't spoken a single word in 7 years. Some claimed he didn't even sleep anymore, just sat there, waiting. But the knock, it wasn't random. It was steady. 2 knocks, a pause, then 2 again, like a message. Daniels leaned closer to the door, his heart racing. He pressed his ear against the steel, but the walls were too thick to make out words. Then, just as he turned away, a whisper cut through the silence. "You shouldn't be here." Daniels stumbled back, almost dropping his flashlight. His radio hissed, crackled, and then went dead. The hallway lights dimmed. Inside the cell, the whispering grew louder, or maybe it was only inside his head. Every officer knew the stories, that ADX wasn't just built to contain people, but to erase them, their voices, their thoughts, even their sanity. Daniels rushed toward the control room, but when he got there, the surveillance monitors showed something he couldn't explain. The feed for cell 118 was flickering, as if someone inside was moving. But that was impossible. The prisoner in that cell was locked down 23 hours a day and hadn't had contact with anyone in years. The warden, a tall, severe man named Robert Hayes, watched the footage carefully. "It's nothing," he said, his tone flat. "A glitch. The system's old." Daniels shook his head. "Sir, I heard something. A voice." "Someone said you didn't hear anything," Hayes interrupted sharply. "And if you did, you didn't. Understood?" Daniels hesitated but nodded. Still, as he left the room, he could feel the warden's eyes following him, and behind that, something darker, something watching from inside the walls themselves. Later that night, Daniels couldn't sleep. He lived in a small room just outside the prison perimeter. The wind howled against the steel fence, and the distant hum of the floodlights filled the silence. But underneath that hum, there it was again, the rhythm. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 knocks. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination, but deep down, he knew the sound was real. Someone, or something, inside ADX Florence was trying to communicate. The next morning, Daniels asked another officer, Morales, about cell 118. Morales frowned and looked around before speaking quietly. "That cell? It's cursed, man. The guy in there's a ghost. Used to be part of something big, cartel or terror network, I think. But after a few years in there, he just disappeared. No one's seen him. They say the cell's empty, but the cameras show shadows moving sometimes." Daniels frowned. "So no one's in there?" Morales shrugged. "Depends who you ask." Inside ADX, every cell was built like a tomb, 7 by 12 feet, one-way mirror, soundproof walls, and an automated door that opened only by code. The inmates never touched another human being, never heard a voice except their own. Meals came through a slot. Even their showers were automated. The design was meant to break communication, to erase networks of power. But Daniels was starting to believe the silence wasn't just control, it was a weapon. That day, the control room screens began to glitch again. This time, not just cell 118, multiple feeds flickered at once. The system flashed static, then images of inmates staring directly into the cameras, even though their cells had no visible light. One of them was Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, or at least his profile. The system wasn't supposed to show faces like that. Daniels ran to the warden's office. "Sir, it's happening again," he said. "The cameras, forget the cameras. Hayes barked. We're shutting the system down. No one speaks of this. Do you understand? But Daniels couldn't forget. He spent the next few nights replaying the footage in his mind. The flickers, the shadows, the whispers. Then one evening, as he walked through the lower hallway alone, the lights went out completely. The backup generators kicked in, casting everything in red. And there, standing at the far end of the corridor, was a figure in orange. A prisoner. But that was impossible. The cell doors were all sealed. Daniels called out, "Who's there?" The figure didn't answer. It just stood still, and then raised one hand to the wall, knocking twice. Pause. Twice again. Daniel's heart pounded. He took a slow step forward, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The figure turned slightly, just enough for him to see part of its face, pale, with hollow eyes, staring right through him. Then, the prison alarm blared, flooding the hall with red light and noise. When Daniels looked again, the figure was gone. All that remained was a single word scratched into the concrete beside cell 118. Listen. And that's when Daniels realized, in a prison built to silence the world's most dangerous men, something had finally found a way to speak. Morning came to ADX Florence like a cold breath on glass. Frost clung to the fence lines, and the guard towers glowed in a pale blue haze. Officer Daniels didn't sleep. He kept hearing the word he saw carved into the wall. Listen. He stood outside cell 118, heart thumping. The corridor was still as a photograph. He pressed his palm to the steel. It felt colder than ice. He leaned closer to the viewing slot, not to see, but to hear. Nothing. Then, so soft he almost missed it, came a long scrape, like a pencil across paper. Daniels called for Morales. Together, they checked the cell panel. All green. Locked. No motion. We're chasing ghosts, Morales said, trying to smile. Daniels didn't smile back. Ghosts don't knock in code. He tapped the pattern on the door. Tap tap, pause, tap tap. The corridor swallowed the sound. A few seconds later, from somewhere inside the wall, the same rhythm answered. Morales's face changed. Okay, that's not wind, he whispered. They went to control. Warden Hayes stood over the monitors with two techs. The feeds for Block H were up, grainy, silent, steady. Hayes didn't look at Daniels. Routine check, he said. Then back to posts. Daniels almost told him about the knock, but the room felt like a box with no air. He swallowed the words. As he turned to leave, one tech flinched. Sir, she said quietly. Look. On the screen for cell 118, a small pixel line crawled across the bottom, like a heartbeat monitor. But there was no audio. No microphone. Nothing that should show a pulse. Daniels and Morales followed the maintenance map to the service corridor behind Block H. The walls here were raw concrete, scored with old drill marks and painted numbers. Steam pipes hissed softly, and the air smelled like metal and bleach. They stopped at a square panel stamped 118B. Morales slid the latch and opened it a crack. Cold air spilled out, along with a dry whisper of sound, like paper rubbing paper. Daniels shone his light inside. The beam hit something strange, a grid of thin cords stretched across the duct, woven tight like a spider web. Thread? Wire? No, strips of prison napkins twisted into string. Someone's built a signal, Morales breathed. The strings ran to a tiny flap made from a food tray label. When air moved through the duct, the flap brushed a concrete edge. Scrape, scrape. 2 scrapes, pause, 2 scrapes. A machine made of scraps, telling a message only if you listened. Daniels felt a chill. Silence is the weapon, he said, remembering training. But silence can also carry sound if you know where to place it. Morales nodded slowly. He's talking through the air. They reported back. Hayes went very still. Seal the duct, he ordered. Remove all fabric from cells in H. No notes. No napkins. Liquid meals only for 72 hours. Morales opened his mouth to argue, then shut it. Daniels stared at the warden. Sir, what if the message isn't to other inmates? What if it's to us? Hayes's eyes flicked to him. Then you've heard it. Return to post. His voice was calm, but his hands were tight at his sides. That evening, the lights dimmed for shift change. Daniels walked the lower hall alone, counting steps like the inmates did. It calmed him. 43 to the end, turn, 43 back. On the 21st step, the air changed, warmer, moving. He stopped. A hairline draft slid across his cheek from the seam where wall met floor. He crouched and placed his ear to the seam. It carried more than air. It carried rhythm, slow, steady, careful, tap, 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 tap. New pattern. New words. Daniels took out his notepad and copied the beats. He found Morales in the brake bunker and laid the notes on the table. I think it's a simple code, Daniels said. Not letters, rooms. He showed his math. 1 tap equals first row, 2 taps equals second row, the double beat marked a column. Each set pointed to a block, then a cell. When they mapped it, the code spelled 3 locations: the library storage cage, the old shower alcove, and the service crawlspace near 118B. 3 places air moved strongest. He's drawing us a path, Morales said. Or laying a trap, Daniels answered. They checked the library storage first. Metal shelves. Old manuals. Nothing. The alcove held only a drain and the smell of soap. But in the crawlspace, behind a pipe brace, Morales's light caught a thin rectangle wrapped in plastic. Daniels reached in with a gloved hand and pulled it free. Inside the wrap was a card from a meal tray, gray, harmless looking, and beneath it, written in pencil so faint it was almost a shadow, were 4 words. Windows look one way. Morales frowned. Meaning? Daniels stared at the message until the truth struck him. We can't see in. But he can see out. They ran to 118. Daniels stood on a stool and angled his small inspection mirror into the viewing slot. Usually you saw only black, soundproof glass behind more glass. But now, with the mirror tilted just right, he saw it, a pinhole in the inner layer, no wider than a pencil tip, bored from the inside. From that point, a narrow line had been carved along the frame, perfectly hidden in the seam. It wasn't an escape hole. It was a seeing hole, aimed not at the door, but at the control camera across the hall. A cold wave washed over him. The inmate inside 118 had been watching the watchers. A soft shuffle sounded behind him. Daniels turned. The corridor lights snapped to red. Alarms barked one hard tone. On the control monitor down the hall, Block H flashed. Lock error, camera loop. Doors didn't open. But cameras did something worse, they lied. The silence had learned a new trick. And in the Alcatraz of the Rockies, someone just used it. Red lights flashed through the corridors of ADX Florence, painting everything in warning. Sirens echoed, not the loud kind meant to alert, but deep, pulsing tones that rattled in the chest like a heartbeat. Officer Daniels and Morales ran toward Block H, where the security feed still showed static. What happened? Daniels shouted into his radio. No response. Only static. Then, a voice broke through, faint, distorted, but human. Control, breach, camera loop, stay away from. The line cut off. The 2 men stopped just before cell 118. The door looked normal. Locked. Silent. But the light above the frame was green, not red, not amber, green. That meant the system thought the cell was open. It can't be, Morales whispered. Daniels checked the digital panel beside the door. The code sequence was corrupted. The cell's ID number blinked between 118 and 000. He turned to Morales. Someone's erased the inmate's ID. Morales' throat tightened. But that's impossible. You can't delete an ADX record. Daniels stared back at the flickering number and said, Someone just did. Suddenly, the heavy door creaked. Not much, just enough to shift the air. The smell hit first, cold steel, dust, and something else, like burnt wires. Morales aimed his flashlight through the small opening. The beam cut through a fog of fine white powder, insulation dust from the wall. The bed was bare. The walls were marked by faint scratches, some fresh, some old. In the center of the floor was a small circle of concrete that looked newer than the rest, like it had been poured recently. Daniels crouched beside it. The concrete was still damp. Morales scanned the corner where the security vent was, or used to be. The grill was gone. Inside the duct, metal edges shone where something had been cut away. "How could he get tools?" Morales muttered. "He didn't," Daniels said quietly. "He used the wall itself." Morales blinked. "What do you mean?" Daniels ran his finger along the marks near the bed frame, smooth lines, circular grooves, layered with dust. "He found a weakness. The soundproofing panels, they're dense but brittle at the edges. Long enough, hard enough pressure and—" Morales cut him off. "You're saying he's been digging with his own hands?" Daniels nodded. The warden arrived moments later with 2 tactical guards. "Seal the corridor," Hayes ordered. "Block all vents and close upper gates." The guards obeyed without question. Hayes stepped to the cell and stared inside. His face didn't change. "There's no escape. No one leaves this place. He's here, somewhere." Daniels stepped forward. "Sir, the record's been wiped. That means the system doesn't even know who's in 118 anymore." Hayes turned to him sharply. "Then stop looking for a man. Start looking for a pattern." They pulled every log from the last 48 hours: air pressure, door sensors, meal delivery. Nothing was missing, nothing moved. Yet the prisoner was gone. "Check the control feeds again," Hayes said. On screen, the camera loop still ran, smooth, silent images of empty hallways. Then, for half a second, a shape crossed the frame. It was fast, a blur, but there was something unmistakable about it. The outline of an orange jumpsuit and a face turned straight toward the lens, though the eyes were covered in shadow. Morales froze the frame. The timestamp was wrong, off by exactly 7 minutes. The guards swept the corridor, while Daniels and Morales followed the wiring path to the main surveillance hub. "If the cameras were looped manually," Daniels said, "it had to be from inside." Morales frowned. "Inside where?" Daniels pointed to the schematic on the wall. The fiber lines ran through the old maintenance shaft, the one that connected the central core to each isolation block. "Here," Daniels said. "That shaft hasn't been opened in years." Morales looked uneasy. "And if it has?" Daniels replied. "Then he's not escaping out. He's moving through." They descended into the maintenance corridor. It was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 people. The walls sweated with condensation, and the air was thick with dust. The sound of dripping echoed like footsteps. Their flashlights caught old labels: Control Feed A, Security Duct C, Ventilation 3. Then Morales stopped. "Daniels, look!" On the floor was a single line of white powder, the same dust from the cell wall, forming arrows that pointed deeper into the shaft. Daniels whispered, "He's leading us." Morales swallowed. "Or warning us." They followed the path until they reached a grated door. Behind it, a chamber pulsed with the hum of the main power core, the heart of ADX Florence. Wires ran in perfect bundles, lights blinking in precise rhythm. But in the center of the room, where the primary control conduit connected, one cable had been cut clean. Hanging from it was a scrap of gray fabric, stained with concrete dust. Morales shined his light upward. Scrawled across the conduit casing, in black marker, were 4 words. "The silence is broken." A low hum filled the air, not from the machinery, but from the intercom system itself. It clicked once, twice, then came alive with a sound no one had heard in ADX for decades. A voice. Calm. Cold. Almost amused. "You wanted silence," it said. "Now listen to what you built." The speakers crackled, and the emergency lights flickered from red to white. Doors locked. Systems rebooted. And then, over the intercom, came something even worse than the voice, a recording of their own footsteps, echoing through the halls. Hayes, watching from control, froze. The silence of ADX Florence, the weapon they had built, had just turned against them. The camera slowly zooms out from the dark corridors of ADX Florence. The alarms fade into silence. Only the echo of a single voice remains. You wanted silence. Now listen. A cold blue light flickers once, then everything fades to black. The walls of America's most secure prison have spoken, but what they said next will change everything. What's really happening inside ADX Florence? And who or what is controlling the silence? The screen darkens completely before bright text fades in.